Sir Duncan the Tall, Dunk the Lunk, is considered to be a Song of Ice and Fire's only true knight, the champion of the small folk, protector of the weak, and defender of the innocent. But does his movement into the knightly class, the very class that assists the lords of Westeros in oppressing the small folk, change the way that we see Sir Duncan? How can a knight protect the small folk when the existence of knights themselves is oppressive? Is Duncan a class traitor? The modern day definition of class traitor is not going to be entirely helpful when looking at Duncan's case because the term itself is beholden to the class distinctions that were around at the time. The term class traitor is most often used in communist settings to describe when a member of the proletariat class, the working class, or the wage earners works directly or indirectly against their class interest in favor of the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class who owns the means of production. Some examples of class traitors would be soldiers, police officers, collection bureau agents, bounty hunters, or repossession agents. The mention of soldiers is what's interesting to me because a knight in Westeros is just a professional soldier. So by this definition, Duncan is most definitely a class traitor. An important distinction to know is that class traitor is not a catch-all term for any time period. It is a specific capitalist term, so it does not fully fit into the social classes of Westeros. The Westerosi class hierarchy is similar to feudalism, where instead of your access to production being the distinction, it is bloodlines and land access. The classes of Westeros depend on your ownership of land. There are 7 distinct classes in Westeros that I have categorized. The 7 different categories that I have created are kings, great houses, lords, landed knights, knights, hedge knights, and peasants. Some of these classes do get a little muddy because not all their distinctions relate to land ownership, but for most it does. The king has total control over King's Landing, and the lords in the crown lands swear fealty directly to him. The great houses, Stark, Tyrell, Arryn, Tully, Greyjoy, Lannister, Baratheon, and Martell, all have complete control over their domains and swear fealty directly to the king. It is the same for lords, but the added step that they swear directly to great lords. However, there are some houses that swear to other larger houses. For example, House Weber does not swear directly to the Tyrells. They have a middleman where they swear to the Rowans, who then swear to the Tyrells. Landed knights have similar access to the land, being able to collect taxes, but more often than not, the land is significantly smaller and they do not have access to the right of pit and gallows, so they cannot enforce a law in their lands, having to go to the other lords. This makes them similar to the average lord with a couple small distinctions. The last 3 classes are distinct because their difference is not in the relation to the ownership of land, but rather their relation to the owners of the land. Knights, also called sworn knights, are knights who are in the permanent service of a lord or landed knight. Oftentimes, they have a family name, but not always. Think about the Tyrells in the time before the conquest, or the Cassells in Winterfell. So they have a direct relationship to the landowners and enjoy many privileges. Hedge knights are knights who are not in the permanent service of a lord or landed knight, often called masterless knights. They jump from lord to lord. Oftentimes, these are members of the peasant class who jumped up a rank, often styling themselves based on where they came from or what they look like. For example, Sir Arlen Pennytree, Sir Sadrits the Mad Mouse, or Sir Illiford the Penniless. But some do have a family name, like Sir Critigan Longbow. These knights are often mocked by the nobility greater than them, but they do possess rights far greater than the rights that the peasants below them have. The last class are the peasants, the lowest of the social class. However, George does not fully flesh out this class because despite none of them owning land, there are vast differences between the top and the bottom of this class. This class includes merchants richer than lords, and then peasants who cannot feed their families. Duncan's relation to the land-owning class is an important part of his identity as a supposed class traitor. Because he is a hedge knight, his ties to the land-owning class are shaky. He serves them and provides his skill at killing in trade for food and a roof. But many see this in the same manner that a farmer trades a portion of his grain to his lord for protection. Although a key difference is that Duncan is not obligated to serve a lord. If the farmer does not provide his grain, then he will be killed for failure to pay taxes. But no one is holding a sword to Sir Duncan's throat. He was not forced to serve the lords that consider hedge knights no better than sellswords. Duncan has no obligation to them besides the self-serving interest that this is a better way to provide for himself than farming or another way of producing value. In a way, this defines him as a class traitor. He is willing to serve the lords because it benefits him. This leads me to asking the most important question in this debate. Can you work a job that does not benefit your class and yet still help them? The fact that knights are a net harm to the peasant class cannot be up for debate at this point, but the extremity to Duncan's role as a knight can be. At this point, we are at a crossroads. Either you cannot work a job, although the job of a hedge knight is not a real job by modern standards, it's a bit more like being certified to be a plumber and then freelancing, that harms your class while not being a class traitor, or you can work a job without betraying your class. And I think the actions Sir Dunk takes as a hedge knight do point us in an interesting direction. Almost everything he seems to do as a knight are in service to his class. While he attends the turn at Ashford, he is willing to attack a royal prince to save a peasant girl from harm, something no one else was willing to do. Dunk's willingness to sacrifice his life of somewhat privilege for a woman he never knew does display his support for class solidarity and refusing to take part in the typical class dynamics of Westeros. Duncan's greatest act was most certainly him being promoted to the King's Guard and subsequently Lord Commander. I also find this one the most interesting. To me, it is seemingly paradoxical because on one hand, he is actively spending his life to protect the king, the very king that upholds the feudal system. However, he also acts as the #1 champion for the smallfolk. Aegon V was the most progressive king that Westeros ever saw. He tried to pass many reforms for the people and fought rebellions to improve the life of the everyday man. And every step of the way, Dunk was by his side. This leads another interesting point where we consider that Aeg is a class traitor as well. He works in opposition to the ruling class to help the peasant. So does this outweigh Duncan's movement to the knightly class? Unfortunately, my time is at an end. I've only explored a tiny amount of Dunk's character, but I've analyzed each and every possible piece of evidence I could have in the time allotted to me to answer this quandary. So my response to this question is this: I don't know. Life is complex and confusing. Within every definition, there lies several contradictions, making it almost impossible for me to come to a decision. My only hope is that this video has given you the insight to come up with an answer that would satisfy yourself.